Quality is not an act, it is a habit. Hello, this is the Quality Link, brought to you by the Regional Network of Standard Setting Bodies, which make up the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality, CROSQ. Every month on the Quality Link, we present one national standards body, NSB, to explore, discuss, or just give an update on how individual NSBs are supporting quality of life and business growth through standards, conformity assessment, and the metrology.
Hello and welcome to Quality Link. My name is Carissa Benjamin from the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards, and I will be hosting this month's episode. Joining us today is Director of the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards, Mr. Stuart LaPlace, and we are going to be discussing how national standards bodies facilitate trade. Welcome, Mr. LaPlace.
Thank you, Carissa. Good to be here.
Okay, let's jump right in. Can you explain to us what is trade and the role NSBs play in facilitating trade?
Well, trade, you can consider it an arrangement between unilateral, bilateral, multilateral countries where you have goods or services moving across borders and boundaries. And the role of our Bureau of Standards generally be to facilitate that. Bureau of Standards is seen as a technical arm for international trade. So they implement the standards, and in some instances they would impose certain regulations to help to coordinate and ensure that the movement of goods are done so in a safe and secure manner, so to speak.
Okay, and how is trade impacted by what NSBs do?
Well, that is a very good question. It can be impacted positively, and it can also be impacted negatively. Positive impact would be to ensure that the homework is done in terms of that good relationship between the retailers in country as well as the persons and the countries that they're importing from, just to ensure that we have a smooth transition in terms of the goods that's coming in, especially from those countries. It can be bad in the sense where you can have a commodity that is light. Let me give you an example. Let's say we're importing ties, and they have a company here that's making quite a bit of money, significant income from selling ties. And through our research, we find out that a lot of the ties coming from this company contains a significant amount of lead. Then we can implement a technical regulation on what commodities can and will not be allowed in ties, and in this case, something like lead, because of the deleterious effect on one's health and the environment as a whole. Then we can put a regulation in place to stop the lead, and by extension you will stop the trade. So this company here, who's benefiting for so many years from these ties, suddenly have to find a new avenue to maintain their line of business. But we're not trying to obstruct the business, we're trying to safeguard the civil society in terms of especially the kids who would be interacting with these ties. So that is how you can impact trade negatively in that aspect. In addition, in terms of the documentation, the smooth flow in which documents are prepared and reviewed, the way we have the border agencies coordinating, that is also very important. So the Ministry of Agriculture, Customs, Finance, Health, Bureau of Standards, we all have to coordinate to make sure that goods move from point A to point B in a timely manner. Each one of those institutions would have their own individual stake along the line of the trade aspect itself.
Okay, so I understand that NSBs set the regulations that govern trade. Tell me more about this.
Well, to piggyback on what we spoke about earlier, when it comes to the regulations, they're set in motion to govern things like national security, environmental health and well-being, health and safety. These are the major pillars that surround why a country would like to inform the trading community of a regulation that we put in place. So you can't just get up and set the regulation, of course. It has to have consultation, you have to have scientific, religious, cultural, all these are aspects that go into informing a regulation. You have to inform the international community, you have to give them time to make comments. There's some emergency situations where you're going to have at least 30 days, but anywhere between 60 and 90 days. It's normally an international preferred timeline that gives persons enough time to adjust or even formulate different strategies in order for them to stay relevant in the trade sphere. So we set regulations based on those pillars I mentioned earlier, the health and safety, national security, environmental degradation, etc. And once we recognize that there's trade happening in a particular area and it's affecting, or the end product is affecting the environment, let's say things like single-use plastics, for instance, that is something that is being looked at. It's very cheap, sterile, etc. But also it's a detriment to the environment.
Yeah, it's harmful, yeah.
Right, as an end-use product. So these are things that have to go in place as regulations to ensure that persons are well informed about what is tolerated, what is not tolerated, and by extension what is deemed safe by the individual sovereign countries that participate in this trade.
Now, each bureau in the region is the technical arm for international trade, as you mentioned. Can you elaborate on this?
We are part of the Ministry of International Trade, and for good reason. The ministry itself deals with a lot of policies. They sit in a lot of high-level meetings where there are trade negotiations, etc., etc. The Bureau of Standards supports this. We're in the background, basically providing intel and to inform some of the decisions made by the overall ministry as a whole, especially at the quoted level and at the CARICOM level in some instances. So we have to advise based on what these trade deals and outcomes can look like. For instance, let's say, for argument's sake, we are talking about sugar. For instance, we produce sugar here in CARICOM. There are some countries that produce sugar, but are we to not allow other territories to send sugar to our territories, or are we only to buy our sugar produced here in CARICOM? And the answer is no. You're supposed to allow sugar to move, right? But at the same time, you have to look at the trade losses in terms of revenue, how that could impact some of these territories. So it's a balance. And I think outside of our purview, then at that higher level they would implement tariffs and taxes across the board to make this more amicable. But at the same time, if there's a commodity that is produced within CARICOM that may contain deleterious items and ingredients, allergens, etc., then we can impose a regulation to have this addressed. So you can halt the actual trade of that commodity until that matter is addressed, and in some cases redressed if necessary.
Okay. Let's move along to conformity assessment. It's an integral part of any bureau. can you tell me about how this conformity assessment facilitates trade?
Well, conformity assessment, especially when it comes to goods, it's very integral for any Bureau of Standards and by extension any country. Now, retailers, they're in the business of making money. Consumers, they're not in the business, but they are purchasing goods based on value and what they deem to be safe to consume. So for goods to conform, it means that they are using standards, they have met health and safety, good manufacturing practices, and by extension, when you as a customer purchase those items, then you are assured that these are quite safe to consume, to use topically on your body, or to have in your immediate environment. So the bureaus generally would have labs to validate a lot of these products that come in, as well as the products that are produced locally. Now, if we are setting a bar for products that are coming in, we should also transfer that bar to the products that are produced locally, based on, of course, the WTO agreement in section 7 and 10. We have to be guided by that in terms of not showing any special favors or leniency locally versus international or vice versa. So that conformity assessment more or less is that in-country assurance and checks and balance, instead of somebody telling you, oh, this is good, the package looks good, everything looks good, but we have microbial issues, we might have issues with chemistry, and sometimes it is important to have that mechanism where we can test in-house. Now, there are some countries, of course, that require specific standards as it relates to products that enter into their territory. Let's say, for instance, honey. If you're moving honey across borders, especially into the EU, they have specific MPL, which is the residual limits in terms of what is permissible for pesticides, right? The maximum pesticide limit. And in that instance, you cannot move honey in places like the EU unless you can certify that this product actually conforms to what their standard is out there in Europe. And to do that, sometimes some of us would have to invest in some very expensive equipment to ensure that these products conform. So we can facilitate trade from this local market into the international market. So equipment like the GCMS, the gas chromatograph mass spec, that is one of the instruments used to verify pesticides residual limit in food. And it's a very expensive piece of equipment that a lot of countries cannot afford. And sometimes we have partner labs sometimes on the outside looking at some of these tests for us, just to ensure that the products conform. So conformity assessment is very wide. It gives that level of assurance to not only the customer but also the importer, to ensure that the due diligence would have been done on the originating end. But you cannot have a Bureau of Standards functioning effectively without a conformity assessment arm.
And how do NSBs help local businesses when it comes to trade? I know you mentioned
Yes.
Yeah.
We touched on it. We can help them with certification, and that basically would be a badge to certify that they're following all the standards, all the regs, the GMPs, the SOPs, and sometimes that badge gives you that extra nudge forward amongst your competitors to show that you would have gone the extra mile and put measures and processes in place to ensure that you have a excellent product. Now at the same time, it's important for us to put the persons who are not at that level, to help them to come up to that level by providing some basic services. Like you're starting a water company, you want to see what your chemistry looks like, we can facilitate what your microbial activity looks like, what your labeling, what the metrology, is involved with that as well. So we can assist with that, we do assist with that, and it's important to encourage persons to put their best into the product.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, it makes our job a lot easier in terms of the checks and the monitoring to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do, and at the same time it makes you a lot more marketable in terms of persons who would buy your product would have that level of confidence. You're opening a restaurant, for instance, health of course would check the premises, etc. We also would assist with on-spot checks, swabbing the food, etc., swabbing the utensils, hands, just to make sure that aspect is being done. Encourage you as well. We're working locally with some businesses to have them Hasap certified as well, especially the fisheries, the abattoirs, etc. And we find it is important to develop the national quality infrastructure along that vein by providing these services to not only big business but also small and medium-sized businesses to bring them to that level. So it is important for our NSB to be able to provide that service at the different tiers as it relates to the type of service that is required.
So now you mentioned Hasap. Can you elaborate more on that?
Hasap, High Analysis Critical Control Point, that is a food safety standard that is implemented through the Netherlands. And what that does, it gives you that level of assurance in terms of being able to check at each point of production of any product, where you can basically identify what can go wrong along the line. So it's easy for you to pick up when you're doing recalls, and it also saves you time, money, lawsuits, etc., because you have that stringent mechanism in place to monitor the product from the moment it starts all the way to the end.
Yeah.
And there is a ISO standard 22000 that deals with food management systems, which is a higher level version of Hasap that deals with the management of the process on a whole, including the documentation, not just the site validation. And we're doing that currently as well with the Caribbean here, and they would have completed the Hasap, and they're now on completing the 22,000. So we are doing it with the abattoir as well as the fisheries to implement their food intake into the facilities, and also how it's managed while it's there, and the output right to the sale to the consumer. So we're working on that. We realized that it was a need, so we are addressing some of those needs currently.
You mentioned certification. Tell me more about certification when it comes to NSBs and trade. You can touch on certification and accreditation when it comes to trade.
Right. Now, of course, everybody speaks about their product highly. Nobody wants to say, my product is substandard, I don't really have a very good product. Everybody normally try to sell their product as the best. We are aware of that. But at the same time, that certification gives you that extra edge, because you now have a third party saying that your product is what you say it is.
Yes.
So that level of assurance to the person now on the outside looking in and saying, wow, this place they're certified in this particular field to make this particular product or provide that particular service. So it gives you that extra level of encouragement. You feel like you're getting right, you're getting value for money, so you're willing to spend because you have that badge of approval that you know came from elsewhere. So it's a little expensive in terms of startup, but in terms of your reach, both regionally and internationally, it gives persons who are on the outside looking in that added assurance to do business with you because you're certified in whatever service or good that you're manufacturing. So it gives you that extra push, that extra edge. You don't have to try to sell your product. Your product basically would be selling itself, or your service would be selling itself based on that level of certification.
Yes.
When it comes to the accreditation now, that is even a step further because you are accredited to a particular level. You have the same third party looking on, but you're also able to replicate some of these practices that an accredited institution should be able to do, standing up to all the international rigors and tests. So the accreditation, especially when you're doing things like, let's say, laboratories, we look at the 17025 standard. We're actually on our way for accreditation as we speak. We're looking at accreditation in air quality as well as chemistry, right? So that gives us that extra push to have our customers more confident in the results that come from this lab.
Yes.
Accreditation basically removes that high level of scrutiny with anything that comes out of that facility. So once you're accredited internationally, it means that you're using the yardstick, so to speak, like any other accredited institution across the globe. So when you wear that badge, your ISO 17025 certified, let's say in water analysis in chemistry, then you should be able to stand up to that rigor. And one of the reasons why I'm saying that you should be able to stand up, there's something called PT testing, right? Proficiency testing, where a lab would send a sample that they would have tested to you, and you should be able to test that product and produce the same results like the lab. So these are some of the checks and balances that happen behind the scenes in accreditation to show that equipment that you have is top-notch, the staff that you have is top-notch, the equipment that you're using in top-notch, the procedures in place, top-notch, the facilities, all of those come together to make an accredited institution. So your results and your service has value because you're accredited. So it means, I wouldn't want to say whatever you say goes, but whatever you say is basically trusted.
Yes.
Because others would have vetted and validated
Yes.
your institution to do this specific work you're accredited to do this work. So accreditation is, I would say, is the final step for any lab or institution that wants to be at that gold standard. So certification is similar, but it's slightly different to accreditation. Accreditation gives that that extra chip on your shoulder. Yeah, it gives
Extra
you that
oomph.
Yes.
Yes.
Just that little extra. We are in the process of doing the ISO 9001 for the Bureau of Standards itself. So we're trying to get our services certified 9001. But our labs, we're trying to get accredited to the internationally lab standard, following ILAC and some of these international lab accreditation bodies, to add value to the service here that we provide in country, and also to help support our fellow sister bureaus in the Caribbean as well by bringing that strength to the network itself.
Okay, anything else you want to add?
Well, what I would like to say though is that for all this to be successful, you have to have buy-in at all levels. So it's all well and good that the Bureau is trying to put a lot of these measures in place, but if you don't have the staff, you don't have the resources, you don't have that political buy-in, you don't have that support financially, then it becomes very difficult for you to ascertain some of these goals. So
Yes.
it sounds good on paper,
Yes.
but there's a lot of work that has to go on behind the scenes to see this through. You have to find ways to motivate staff and keep persons engaged as well. You cannot have this thing running on for too long. So I think persons working in an institution that is, on the up and up and seeking to have accreditation and to validate the work that they do on a day-to-day basis, I think that goes a very long way. That is something that persons can be proud of as well, and by extension, the country, the region, the network could also be proud of as well. So that is something not to be taken lightly, and that is also something that requires significant commitment to see it through. So I will end by saying that.
Well, Mr. LaPlace, we received a lot of information today on how NSBs play a role in facilitating trade and the great impact our bureaus have on trade. We appreciate having you on the show today.
Thanks, not a problem at all.
Okay, thank you again for listening to Quality Link. This is Carissa Benjamin of the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards signing off.
This has been a production of the CROSQ's Marketing, Information, Knowledge Management and Education Committee. Join us next time for another episode of the Quality Link.